Londres.
Seriously? That's it? After all those talks, all those summits, all that travelling around, we're down to this supposed emergency brake and this supposed red card? The poor old Prime Minister. Who else has travelled so many air miles in Europe to so little purpose? Actually, it's silly to ask that question. I'm an MEP. I know a lot of people who travel those kinds of air miles to such little purpose. But let's break down what's actually happened. The red card, so-called, the ability for a group of national parliaments to block EU legislation. Half, or more than half, of national parliaments would be allowed to tell the Commission not to do something. Well, that's, sorry to spell this out so bluntly, that's just not going to happen, right? Why would half the governments have signed up to something if the majority of the parliaments didn't want to do it? It would only work if you had parliamentary rebellions in a majority of the member states. But not only is it ineffective, it's actually worse than doing nothing. It's worse than the status quo, because for the first time, it treats the House of Commons and the other national legislatures as subunits within a European polity. Rather like in the US, you can change the constitution with the support of 2/3 of state legislatures. Instead of being a sovereign parliament in free association with others, our parliament is treated as one among several subunits in Europe. And as for the emergency brake, it's really important to understand what went on here. We wanted an emergency brake on migration. That was what the PM was asking for, never mind what I was asking for. Right? In other words, a cap on the number of EU nationals who could come in each year. And he was told by the Eurocrats, no, that's no go. And then he said, let's have a moratorium on benefits claims, that for 4 years you shouldn't be able to claim any welfare. In other words, that you should need to have put something into the pot before you draw out of the pot. Very reasonable, you'd have thought, but again, he was told no go. And so we're then reduced, and I think this is something of a national humiliation, we're reduced to saying, okay, if you won't give us an emergency brake on migration and you won't give us a moratorium on benefits, what about an emergency brake on benefits? Even though the government's own statisticians have confirmed that it will make no difference to migration, and even though the whole row has been confected. You think about this, either Brussels is in charge of social security or Westminster is. If Brussels is in charge, then no agreement is any use without a treaty change. And of course, nobody is proposing a treaty change. If Westminster is in charge, then we could do this tomorrow without needing anyone's permission. We could have done it last year. The whole thing has been put together for the sake of staging a row, as ministers confirmed right at the beginning of this process, would be part of their tactics. They need to make it look as though something has been sought, and they need to make it look as though something has been dragged out of Brussels, when in reality, nothing has changed. We're left with the status quo as it is now. It must now be clear that the EU cannot be reformed from the inside. I reckon that was pretty clear after 40 years of trying to do it, but if there was any remaining doubt, surely it's now evaporated after watching the farce of this renegotiation attempt. If this is how little the EU institutions are prepared to make concessions now, when their second largest contributor is on the point of holding a referendum on membership, imagine how we would be treated the day after having voted to stay in. We would be deemed to have acquiesced in everything that was coming our way. We can see that there is a crisis up ahead. Never mind what's happening with the collapse of Schengen. We can see also the looming crisis in the euro, and we know that we're going to be dragged again, despite all of the assurances to the contrary, into more bailouts. That's the pile-up on the road ahead. An emergency brake is no use. We need to take back control of our steering wheel in time to avoid that car crash. Voting leave is the safer choice.